Okay, so now you're stuck with me. And there's a lot of time left before 9 o'clock. So I might get on a roll. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat. When I start talking about the things involved in our ministry, I get kind of excited and gigged up. And I do have gum in my mouth, and I know that's tacky for a speaker. And I'm just going to tell you, it's not going to get spit out because my mouth gets dry when I speak. So it needs to be there. And a peppermint's too big, and, it's just all a mess. So just forgive me. I remember as a kid when I would get up in front of church and I would speak, there was an older gentleman by the name of Mr. Smeltzer that used to get on me all the time because I had gum in my mouth. And it used to be like a thing between us. So I always think when I stand up in front of a group of people, you probably shouldn't have gum in your mouth. Sorry, Mr. Smeltzer, I'm going to chew the gum anyway. And I'm not a kid anymore. So I was raised in the church. And I'm going to ask some questions just to see exactly how interactive we're going to be this morning. So some of them might be random. Some of them have purpose. So I was raised in the church. How many of you were raised in the church? Okay. I was raised in the Methodist church. How many of you were raised in the Methodist church? Oh, that's interesting. How many of you have been in the church your entire life and have never drifted away? Right, so see, did you notice that the hands change within those group structures? Okay, here's a random question. And you don't have to raise your hand to anything if you don't want to. I'm not trying to embarrass anybody or call anybody out or cause everyone to go, oh, did you know Susie did that? But how many of you have ever committed a crime? How many of you have ever been caught for committing a crime? Okay, it's good to know. I'd just like to know who I'm working with here. Okay, so we will be interactive, so this will be fun. So I was raised in the church, and I am going to refer to my notes because I'm not a memorizer. I can't memorize anything. I came from a family with 2 kids. I have a younger brother who's not nearly as cool as I am. But I tried my best. My mom tried her best. He's just not as cool as we are. I had 2 parents the whole time I was being raised, that typical household family. My mom stayed home with us for a while, and then later when we were in school, she went back to work. So I had a pretty normal childhood. I was raised in the church. It's all I ever knew. I loved church, and I was involved in church a lot because church was the safe place where people didn't make fun of you if you messed it up. And they loved you no matter what. And all of the grown-ups always just showered you with attention. And you just felt like you were wonderful all the time. School was a different place because peers are mean. Girls especially. Let's just throw that out there. Girls can be very mean and cruel. And school was not always a real comfortable, safe place. So I didn't get involved in a lot of things. But boy, I was a rock star at church. I did it all. I sang in the choir, and I played in the handbells, and I was in the musicals, and, my parents at one point were, like, on staff at the church and stuff, so there was all of this involvement. Church was just a natural part of my life. Okay, and because of that, I'm here this morning to talk to you about how God used all of that foundational stuff to do what he's doing with me now. And some of what he's doing with me now is absolutely nuts. But it's God, and we trust God, and there's all that stuff. So we'll just go with it. So I participated in all the stuff at youth. As a young adult then, I kind of drifted away. Because, I don't know if you guys have this experience at your church, but the young adult section of the universe is a hard duck to church. They have specific needs and specific expectations, and there's all kinds of research that dictates, how to captivate a young adult group of people within the church structure and keep them involved and motivated. And I don't know about you guys, but everywhere I go, it's the same challenge. People don't know how to keep the young adults connected to church. And many times we drift away. We go off to school. I say it we, as if I'm still a young adult. But we drift off, we go to school, And either we don't find a church at college, or we just don't care because we've been doing church for our entire lives and we just want to do something different. So I drifted. I'm sure that my mother will tell you that she spent several sleepless nights in my college years wondering what the heck I was doing on Sunday morning because I wasn't going to church. But then I got married and I started having a family, and then all of that kind of, flooded back into my spirit. It was like God said, wait a minute, this is important. You learned better than this. You were taught better than this. Even if you're not going to do it for yourself, you need to do it for your kids. So I left and I came back. Moved forward several years. I received my ministry call while I was working at a church as the secretary, the church actually that I grew up in. And the church staff was going to a conference. And I'm giving you a backstory so you understand where I'm coming from, okay? You're all looking at me like, oh, this is nice. This is great. I thought this was going to be something meaningful. We'll get there. So I was working as the church secretary. The staff was going on a conference, and they didn't have anybody to go to the workshops for children's ministry. How many of you work in children's ministry, either as a volunteer or a staff in that capacity? Yeah, it's not always easy to find people who will sit through that stuff. Because, usually they make you jump around and dance and do songs and play games and, get messy and all that kind of stuff. So I volunteered because nobody would go, because we didn't have a children's director at the time. I went to those workshops. I came back from that experience, and I told my pastor, I don't care if you can pay me. I must be in ministry for children. I feel like for the first time, God has grabbed a hold of me and he has said, this is where I want you and this is what I want you to do. And I don't care what it takes, you get yourself there. And I'll be right there with you the whole time. So we worked it out. Pastor put me on staff in that capacity. We got a different church secretary. All was good. So for several years, 20 to be exact, I worked in children's and family ministry at 3 separate churches in different phases of my life while my kids were growing up. And I did the typical, neglect your own kids to take care of other people's, and, had those conversations with my children and faced all those challenges. And it grew me and it stretched me. And then one day I met this family whose situation was so unique that it just captivated my heart. It was a mom, 3 kids, 3 separate dads. The youngest child's father was in prison. And the mom came to me, her and I became friends, and she came to me, she actually volunteered in my program. She said, I need help. She said, Tony is lost. He's got all these questions about God and why and the Bible, and I don't know how to answer him. I don't know how to have those conversations. Can you just write him a letter and introduce yourself and see if you can't get him to talk to you? Okay, my life has been at this point and that moment has been as far away from any sort of prison contact as you could possibly be, okay? I never even visited the principal's office when I was in school. I had never broken the law or done any of those kinds of things, so prison was as far away from me as I could possibly imagine, but something in me said, she wouldn't ask if she didn't need, so just do it and see what happens. So I did. That was approximately 4 or 5 years ago. Tony and I are thick as thieves now. Tony calls me his mom. My husband and I send Tony money on a regular basis so that he can have shampoo and soap. Because prison isn't easy, and they have to pay for those things. It's not just a given that you get to bathe when you're in prison. So we've gone through this journey together, and God used Tony in that moment in the last 5 years to cultivate what is now the ministry that my husband and I do through our work. So Tony had a very unstructured, unconventional, dysfunctional bringing up that led up to his incarceration. Not caused it, but led up to. Probably contributed, but didn't cause it. And he knows that. And he was heavily involved in drugs. And oddly enough, he sold drugs at the very place where I now hold my ministry. It was one of his main haunts. It was one of his most successful spots when he was dealing drugs in Elkhart. And so when he found out that I was there, he was very worried, very scared for my safety and that kind of thing. But we've worked through that, and he doesn't get to have a choice anyway because he's in prison. What can he do? But Tony will be getting out of prison in December after 10 years of incarceration. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the first place I'm going to make him give back to the community is the very place where he took from the community, which is where we hold our main base. So, 2 years ago, I decided that I was too comfortable in children's ministry. I was too complacent. I was too just kind of, things were just kind of going along. Nothing was changing. Nothing was dynamic. Nothing was energetic. And I wasn't doing a good job anymore. I was just doing. So I talked to a friend one day who I didn't even know at the time was involved in lots of different business things, and he had this place where he was running like a transitional housing facility. He was partnered with the Department of Corrections. He worked kind of in close proximity with parole and probation, but he really wasn't hands-on. He was pretty much the landlord. The building was a shambles. Nobody was really taking care of it. Nobody was managing it. And he went in on Friday afternoons from 3 to 5 to collect rent. And that was pretty much the extent of his contact with the people who lived there. And he said, pretty much all of them have come from prison right away. Ding, big bells going off in my head. This is me, this is me, this is me, this is me. This is where I'm supposed to be in some capacity. So we talked more, drank more coffee, and I said, you need to hire me. He says, I don't really want to pay anybody. I said, I don't care. You need to. I tend to have that effect on people. It's like, you need to hire me. I need to do this no matter what. We're going to work together. So eventually it happened, and he hired me. And all of a sudden, I found myself in a situation where I was surrounded by felons, most of them, all of them men, in a filthy environment that had not been kept up, in motel rooms that hadn't been painted in years, that smelled like cigarette smoke and dirty socks, and the tubs were from the 1940s, and I thought, wow, this is cool. I went home every day exhausted. I spent 90% of my day sweating from head to toe, dirt from my fingertips to my elbows, paint all over me. And every day when I went home, I thought, man, God's cool. And I couldn't figure out exactly why. And there were lots of times when I would go to work and I'm thinking, okay, please don't let me die today. Because literally, you never knew what was going to happen. So I'm spending every day washing windows and mopping floors and cleaning up stuff that's been there for 3 years that nobody's bothered to touch, and trying to figure out how I can give this guy a towel when he comes in for the first time, because he needs a towel to take a shower. Everybody should have a towel when they come out of the shower. That's not an unrealistic expectation. And yet we had no towels. We were a motel that had no towels, old linens that didn't fit the beds we had, mattresses that didn't have any springs really left in them. I mean, we were decrepit. And I thought, there's got to be people in this community that want more for this. I cannot be the only person who thinks that there's more for these people. After all, if we are a community, and I'm going out on a limb here because you may not all agree with me, and that's okay. You're stuck because I'm in front of you, and so you can shake your head no if you want. That's cool. We as a community have put leaders in place that are going to make laws and establish restrictions and boundaries and punishments and things for crimes that are committed. Now, I don't want anyone to think in this room at this time or ever that I am condoning criminal behavior. Absolutely not. I think some of the things that I have heard and seen come through my doors are absolutely horrific. I go home sometimes after meeting a new individual and hearing what they've done, and I think, gosh, how can I sit across my desk from this person and feel compassion for them because of what they've done? And yet, there is God. And yet I remind myself that there are times in my life when I have done things when God might feel the exact same way toward me. He might sit and look at me and think, how have I created this person to be good, and yet she's done this? And how can I have compassion? But there is God's love. So we move forward. So as a community, if we're going to put people in place that are going to make those things happen, and we're going to punish people for their crimes, as we should, to the fullest extent, if we're going to say, you have to be in prison 20 years, and then we're going to let you out in 20 years, then by golly, as a community of people, it is just as much our responsibility to help those people be successful human beings and not return to crime when they re-enter our communities. If it's not our responsibility, then whose is it? Whose is it? How successful have you ever been at doing something really, really hard without anyone to support you? How successful have you ever been doing something that's really, really almost impossible without having a support system? I've watched those people. I've watched those situations. Succeeding is hard. The world is a hard place to live in. Society is a hard place to live in. There are lots of things. And if you have addictions and weaknesses, and if you have been raised in an environment that has not taught you the normal things in life, as it were, and nobody's put the tools in your tool belt to live your life successfully, and now you've spent 10, 15, 18 years incarcerated, you come out and there's no one around that gives a rip whether you succeed or not. What happens? That's not who we are. That's not who God created us to be. God did not create us to drop people off on the doorstep and say, okay, have a good time. Lots of luck to you. We'll be right here when you fail, to pick you back up and take you back in. And some of them mess up on purpose because going back to prison is easier than living out here. Again, I'm not condoning crime. I'm not saying it's okay. It's not. But my sin and their sin is the same. God sees it the same. I don't care what you've done. There's no measurement. I don't recall anywhere in Scripture where God had in there that says, well, if you do this, it's a heck of a lot worse than if you do this. I'm going to love you less if you do this than if you do this. That's not who we are, right? That's not who we are. That's not who God created us to be. So in our facility, we cleaned things up a bit. How many of you know Elkhart or are from Elkhart? Okay. Do you know where the old Travelers Inn Motel next to Dairy Queen on West Jackson is? That's my hood. So the next time you drive by there, please feel free to stop by because you're welcome into the crazy anytime you want. It's a safe place. I wouldn't invite you if it wasn't. I have a big dog. He's very cool, but he's very intentional. So he'll greet you, and he'll assess who you are and whether you should come in or not. And then you know. That's my motel. That's our motel. That's where our home base is. Now, we decided that we couldn't just keep ourselves closed in. So we do open ourselves up to the community in other capacities. I manage some properties for the city of Elkhart for the Redevelopment Commission, and I interestingly enough, try to use those to kind of transition my guys from the motel into apartments, because nobody should want to live at that motel for a long time. It should be a landing point where they can catch their breath, get a job, find some income flow, and then move on with their lives. But yeah, we have 18 rooms. And I started with my office in one of the rooms, and then the previous owner, before he sold it to us, had started a building project where the front room, where the manager's quarters and the front desk used to be, we opened that up, put a bathroom in there, put a kitchenette in there, and a great big conference type area. My office is in there now, and that's where we kind of congregate. That's where we have community at the motel. I get people who are fresh out of prison or jail. They could have spent 6 months in county, out on County Road 26 in Elkhart. I could be getting someone from South Bend Work Release who did 20 years in prison and then did another several months at South Bend Work Release, and now they work in Elkhart, so they need a place to live in Elkhart. I could get sex offenders who committed their crime in Elkhart, and therefore they must return to the community where they committed their crime to serve their parole or probation. I have manslaughter, I have homicide, I have rape, I have robbery, I have theft, the gamut. And you would be interested to realize that there are lots of different levels of what's classified in general as a sex offender. That does not mean child molester. It could, but it doesn't always. It includes so many different things, and I never knew that. I was so ignorant when I started this job. So I was one of those people that on Facebook, if I heard a story about someone who had been molested or attacked or whatever, I was like, burn them. Just burn them. That's terrible. Who would hurt a child? But honestly, sex offender doesn't mean child molester, and that's all I'm going to say about that. You can ask me more questions later if you want. So, in our facility, we deal with all of these different gamuts of crime, and I work very closely with a specific parole officer and a specific probation officer, because they are the two people who are solely responsible for all of the sex offenders on parole or probation in Elkhart County. One is probation, one is parole, and they are responsible, and they cover all of it. And it's a lot, and it's exhausting. So we work in close proximity together. They call me when somebody's coming in like 3 months or 3 weeks from now. I check my list, see what I have open. I have an intake file where I print out their information and their history so that I know what I'm getting, and then I wait. And then we pray we have an open room. And if we get somebody that moves out, we clean the room, we change the beds, we put the dishes in, we get it as spiffy as possible, and we wait. And then here comes a little white van to drop off a guy with nothing but a mesh duffel bag, a laundry bag. The last guy that came in had a pair of gray prison-issued sweats with no elastic. He had a shoestring tied around his waist. He had a white T-shirt on. He had his white prison-issued tennis shoes. And he walked up looking scared to death because he's about 25. So we go through the process, we intake, and the whole time I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, please God, let this one succeed. Let us support enough that this one will move forward. Because lots don't. The reality is it's too much. Can you imagine how hard it would be if you couldn't get your driver's license or an ID? You couldn't get an ID because you don't have the right proof of address. You can't get a job without an ID. You have no idea where your birth certificate is because that was lost a long time ago because your mom, who was a meth head, didn't keep any records, and you don't even know where you were born. So now you can't get a job, you can't get your ID, You need to go to the Social Security office, but they won't even talk to you till you have an ID. So you have no way to start generating income. And you just got out of prison after 10 years. We do what we do because that person should have somebody that sits next to them and says, you know what? What you did and what I do, God looks at the same. Your sin and my sin measured the same. And we're going to help you as much as you can. As long as you participate in your success, we're going to walk right alongside you every step of the way, and we're going to make sure that you move out of this place into an apartment, that eventually you get to drive a car and you don't have to rely on a bicycle or somebody else to take you from one point to another. We're going to do everything we can because, people, that's what God has called us to do. Now, God may not have called you to sit at the Travelers Inn Motel and do this, and I get that. I totally get that. But it's people like you who may not ever want to sit in that office and do what we do, but have passion for people. We go to churches, and I decided that education is power. People fear what they don't know. So we started educating people. The motel was like the best kept secret in Elkhart because nobody wanted to know where the sex offenders lived. Nobody wants to know that. They just want to know that they're not in their neighborhood. But the fact is, there's probably some living in your neighborhood that just haven't followed the rules and registered like they're supposed to. And they don't have somebody that's walking alongside them, so they got desperate, they lived where they could, and they're hiding out hoping that nobody's going to know. And I'm not saying they're going to reoffend in your neighborhood. Don't go home and knock on all your neighbors' doors and say, hey, I need to see your criminal history right now. But the fact is that desperate things happen when people are backed in a corner and don't know what to do. So we walk alongside, and we started pulling in Bible study groups, and we started pulling in older ladies groups at the church, like social groups and whatnot, that were asking questions. We said, come down to the motel. We'll sit in the front room that's not even redecorated yet. It's a big black hole. We'll sit in there with no heat. Everybody can keep their coats on. And we'll talk about what happens here and the reality of reentry and what it looks like. And I'll have a couple of guys come and talk to you that have experienced this and explain to you what their challenges have been and how they see God working in their lives. So we pulled more and more groups in. And I got involved in, the sheriff department has, they initiated what's called the Elkhart County Reentry Initiative. And it's a committee of people who are leadership people in the community who have passion about reentry and the success of it and want to reduce recidivism. So we all work together on a regular basis to try to figure out ways to educate the community and to minimize that recidivism number. And sometimes we come up with great ideas that fail, and sometimes we come up with great ideas that succeed, and sometimes we draw blanks because we don't know what to do. Housing is always, first and foremost, the most challenging spot that we face. So the next time you drive through your community and you see all like vacant houses or things that places where people aren't living, we drive through downtown Elkhart all the time, and there's all these buildings that haven't had people in them for months or a year, and we think, gosh, if we could just have that house and turn it into 3 apartments, we could help 3 more people. But we wait because it's not there yet. But here's the bottom line. We take donations as much as we possibly can, not financial donations, because I don't want to go out and spend other people's money, but we have people stop by on a weekly basis with men's clothing, anything from, hey, my son went to college and he cleaned out his closet, to Uncle Bert just passed away and Aunt Bertha said she wanted us to donate these to you. We get toiletry items, traveling salesmen who go to hotels and stuff all the time for their job, and they get all those traveling things. We get bags of those, and we make up little toiletry kits so that when new guys come in, we can put those in their room and they can at least wash themselves and feel clean for the first time maybe in a long time. Toilet bowl brushes, cleaner, plungers. I mean, you name it, and we have received it as donations. I'll have groups call me and say, well, what do you need? I need toilet roll plungers. Because I need to have one in every room because I am not going in there to fix that toilet. Some of you boys are kind of nasty, so I'm just saying. So anything that we can possibly get, and canned goods. My mother, bless her heart, will come in with grocery bags full of canned soup, and we have what's called the giving table. And the guys will come in my office almost every day and check the giving table because that's where their mailboxes are. Their mailboxes are in my office because I want to see them and interact with them and check in and see how they're doing. Because everybody should have somebody that say, hey, how was your day? Man, you look tired. Did you get enough sleep last night? Everybody should get to experience that, right? That's not a lot. That is not a lot. Sit down and tell me what's going on. You look like you're upset. What's going on? No, sit down just for a minute. No, it's okay if you bother me. Just sit down for a minute and we'll talk. And now they come in and they say, Michelle, I really need to talk to you. Can you ask everybody to leave for a minute? And then they sit down, and 25 minutes later, I don't have any of my work done, but this person felt like somebody listened to them, paid attention to them, and placed value in them. God did not create us to minimize each other. God created us to lift each other up. God created us to encourage each other. The Bible says, love God, love others. It's 4 words. But it's action, not words. We're expected to put that into action, and that's what we do in our ministry. We put it into action because everybody deserves to know that God loves them. And we do that too. We take a boatload of them to church with us every Sunday. And now, I'm not there today, and they still are. Because they no longer go because I'm dragging them there. They go because they need to be there. And they need to kneel at the altar during prayer time, and they need to ask God to forgive them for the feelings that they're having or the actions that they've shown or the hate that they have in their heart. And it's all part of the ministry that we do. And it takes time, and it takes passion, and it takes love. And sometimes it really bites. But we do it anyway, because God wants me to love him and to love others. And that's it. Thank you.